Blog Talk Radio.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is?
Julie.
Huh?
Julie.
Huh? Guess what day it is?
Guess what day it is? Guess what day it is?
Anybody? Anybody?
Mike.
Huh?
What day is it, Mike?
Huh? Woo-hoo!
Leslie, guess what today is? Leslie, guess what today is?
It's hump day.
Hump day!
It's hump day.
Hump day!
Yeah, this is Tom Donelson. Donelson Files on here on the Batchelor News Radio Network. And I am the chairman of America's PAC. I'm a project director and research associate for America's Majority Foundation, the author of 8 books, including The Rise of National Populism and Democratic Socialism, which is available on Post Hill Press and Amazon.com. So if you want the latest dealing with the political forces that have been unleashed in the 2016 election and continue today, that's the book to read. And tonight we're going to have Patrick Fitzgibbons, and Mr. Fitzgibbon is a retired police commander from Colorado with 2 decades of experience in law enforcement. He's also an adjunct college professor and basically teaches criminal justice. In addition, advanced degrees of business and organizational leadership, and he is a former paratrooper with the elite 82nd Airborne Division. He's an avid supporter of active military members and veterans. And he's the author of the book we'll describe a little bit later of Evolve. And we may a little bit later. I've also invited our good friend Pam, who works in the South Carolina and works as a profiler in South Carolina, and she has been one of those who have been investigating cold cases, and she may have some thoughts on the Jeff Epstein updates. Because she came on board, and maybe Patrick, I may ask you for some of your opinions on that as well. So maybe the first question I'm going to give you, obviously I'm giving you some of your background, kind of expand on that background, your own background.
Well, Tom, first of all, thank you for inviting me on the show, sir. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, my background is, I grew up in a military family. My father, who recently passed away, was a military man of many years, and I knew from a young age that I wanted to serve, so I joined the Army. I went, like you indicated, I was down at Fort Bragg, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes for a while, and when I got out of the military, I didn't want to make a career out of it like my father. I came back to Colorado and got into the police academy, and like we were talking before, I did 23 years of law enforcement in 2 agencies, and I recently retired as an operations commander. It's different in every department, Tom, but my job personally was I was in charge and managed and coached and mentored the patrol officers in my department.
Now, you're also a professor. Where are you a college professor? Where do you teach?
I teach at the University of Colorado in Denver, and I also teach at the Community College of Denver. And I teach a variety of criminal justice courses, anywhere from, crime scene investigation to constitutional law.
Okay. Now, also, you have a podcast, DJ Evolution. Kind of talk about your podcast as well, because I found,
Yeah, the podcast I started, it's called CJ Evolution, and that stands for Criminal Justice Evolution. And you can find it at cjevolution.com. And I started the show, the podcast, a little over 3 years ago when I was still working. And the whole premise behind the show was to, give back to the profession that has given me so much over the years. And I wanted to kind of motivate, inspire, and uplift law enforcement out there. Tom, and listeners probably do, where, law enforcement is going through some tough times right now. But the whole premise behind the show was to, kind of lift and motivate, pump officers up. And we talk about some dark topics. That's just the nature of the business. But most of the guests I have on, and I'm up to 300 30 episodes, I think now, are just great people, and we're talking about everything from physical fitness to taking care of yourself, to nutrition, to leadership, you name it. I have guests that come on, and we can all tie it back into the profession. So it's been great. It's been a great ride. Continues to grow. So
let me ask you a quick question here. Is it? How, if you were to say, what's the percentage of, let's say, former military going into policing? Is there a high percentage?
Oh yeah, I don't know the exact percentage, but I would say, I would probably, if I was guessing, probably 75. 80%, maybe that's too high. Maybe some people are saying that's too high, but I would probably say, the majority of people out there, it's just a natural progression, Tom. From the military into law enforcement. It was for me. Because it's you're used to a hierarchy, you're used to chain of command, and that's pretty much what law enforcement is. It's paramilitary, so. You've already used to that structure. So I would say, and again, I don't know the percentage actually, but it's probably a pretty high percentage. Most of the officers that I work with were ex-military. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. One of the things you've kind of done, let's say, on your website as well as the podcast, you talk about opportunities in law enforcement. I'm going to put it this way. If I'm a young man or a young woman thinking about the future, why would I consider law enforcement as an opportunity? What would you tell them?
Well, it's a calling, Tom. It really is. Law enforcement, I'm going to tell you right now, isn't for everybody. It's a calling for most officers out there, and you really have to want to do it. You don't do it for the money. You're not going to be rich, become a police officer. So that's why I said it's normally a natural progression from military to law enforcement. Not that if a listener out there is listening and they don't have any military, they can't do that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, it's a great, noble profession. We're going through some tough times now where we've talked about off the air. But I would tell them, for the young officer or young person out there who wants to get into the field, it's a very noble and honorable profession. And you would give back to your communities and you would serve your communities every day. But it's a tough job. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, and it's not for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Well, put it this way. What makes a good police officer? What are the qualities that would make for a good police?
Great question. And I would say, when I was on hiring boards, I did a lot of the hiring when I was still, before I retired. We're looking for honesty, integrity, good moral character. We're not looking for perfect people. There aren't any perfect people out there. But, we're looking for people that have a high sense of service, commitment, dedication, teamwork. It's a very, very tedious process to get into law enforcement. There's a lot of steps, a lot of backgrounds, a lot of tests. But those are the things we're looking at. It's a culmination of things. We're looking for the right, male or female to fill those roles, because those are very high-profile roles. You're in touch with the community every day, so we want people that are good people out there making good decisions.
Okay, from beginning, let me ask this question. Let's say I choose to become a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned several steps just to get through the hiring process. Mm-hmm. How long would it take for me to, from the time I say I fill in my application up to, let's say, getting into the police academy? How long would it approximately?
That's a great question, Tom. And most departments are different. There's no standardization across departments. So what might take a couple months for one department might take 6 months or a year to another, for another organization. So it really does depend on what agency you're looking for. And as far as the police academy goes, some agencies have in-house academies that they'll send the people that they hire to before they hit the streets. Now, some agencies don't do that. So law enforcement agencies really, really differ. So that's kind of a hard question, because I would say on average it's going to take at least 6 months to get hired. After you go through the steps, there's usually a written application process. There's an oral board. Usually it's a combination of law enforcement and sometimes citizens. The last step is usually going to be a meeting with the command staff or the chief of police or the executive of the organization, sheriff. And in between that, there's usually polygraph tests, there's psychological tests, there's physical tests, physical fitness tests. So it really depends on the agency. But I would say probably on average, it's probably going to take about 6 months.
This is Donelson Files on the Batchelor News Radio Network. My partner, Coco Konski, is still out with some illness. I think the last time I checked with her, she got 4 days of bed rest, and hopefully everything is working out for the best. So as I say, keep her thoughts, keep her in your thoughts. This is the Donelson Files on the Batchelor News Radio Network. One of my special guests, Patrick Fitzgibbons. And Patrick, you got a book. So before we go on, let's say, an advertisement of other great programs on the network, try to talk very briefly about your book.
Well, it's a micro book. Thanks for mentioning it, Tom. And it's called Evolve, and it's a collection of routines, habits, and advice to take charge of your life and be your best self. It's a small book, easily digestible. You can do it in one sitting. It's going to be about 70 pages. It's my editor has it right now. I don't have it in my hand right now, but it should be mailed to me soon. And I'm excited about it. And I wrote this for law enforcement, but really, in criminal justice professionals, but really it's for everybody out there who wants to kind of better themselves.
Okay. All right. This is Tom Donelson, Donelson Files on the Batchelor News Radio Network. We'll be right back after you hear this great announcement for yet another great program on our network.
Hey, this is L.A. Batchelor reminding you, if you're looking for real discussion on sports, politics, religion, and other topics, you need to join us on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern at WCOMFM.org, on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. at blogtalkradio.com/LA-Batchelor, and on Thursdays at the same web address. Follow us on Facebook at Pad Nation, on Twitter, Pad Nation, the number 2 at Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can email us with your requests, your comments, your concerns, anything you want at our email address at LABatchelor with a T, BATCHELOR 40@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and Pad Nation, Instagram, and of course, if you miss any part of our broadcast, make sure you go to thebachelorpadnetwork.com and listen and enjoy the Bachelor Pad.
This is Tom Donelson. Again, the Bachelor Pad follows our show every Tuesday, and you can listen to it on a daily basis on the Bachelor Pad Network. You go to bachelorpadnetwork.com, and the Bachelor Pad will be available. And later on the show, we'll give you times when you can listen to all of our shows. So stay tuned, and we'll give you all the information you need to listen to, not just on at this particular period of time, but throughout the week, kind of a schedule. So, all right, get back again to our guest tonight, Patrick Fitzgibbons. Let me here. Okay, there's a section you had: emotional intelligence versus experience and IQ. First of all, how do you define emotional intelligence?
Great question. Emotional intelligence, I think we all have to be aware of emotional intelligence, and we should be practicing it all the time and being aware of it. But basically, emotional intelligence is being aware or cognizant of one's emotions, how you handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically, and that's part of being a law enforcement officer and being in criminal justice, is that you have to be able to express your emotions in the correct way, and in order to make that connection. Now, sometimes you have to be curt with people, but that's emotional intelligence. Really, really being aware of your emotions. In a nutshell, that's what it is.
Now, how would you say? Because there was a question that you kind of try to answer. What's better? If I'm hiring a person for a job, regardless of it's police or anywhere else, what's more important, emotional intelligence, IQ, or experience?
Well, ideally, obviously, you want both. But if I would have to pick, Tom, I would say emotional intelligence, because that's really, I mean, obviously we want smart officers out there making good decisions, but emotional intelligence, I mean, intelligence is one thing, but emotional intelligence, being able to control your emotions, being aware of your emotions, because that's going to dictate a lot of your contacts out there and a lot of your interactions. I would probably pick that over IQ.
All right. Let me. That's kind of an interesting aspect because, IQ and intelligence are things that people look for, but the emotional intelligence. Would a better way of saying it, being aware of what your surroundings and understanding your surroundings, is that a good way to describe it? Or another way.
Well, that's one. Well, situational awareness is one thing, Tom. I mean, every officer has that, or every officer develops that over time. Situational awareness is very, very important. That goes into officers, safety issues and stuff like that. But I would say emotional intelligence is a little bit different because then, you're aware, you're in tune with your emotions. You're in, and so I can't tell you how many times throughout my career, Tom, people yelling in my face and, cursing at me and calling me this and that, and not reacting to that, and just, it's very, very difficult for one. But that's emotional intelligence, and it's all important. We want that in our officers. We want smart officers, but we want them to develop that emotional intelligence, which is not only needed in law enforcement, criminal justice, but any profession you do out there. But what you were saying about being aware of your surroundings, that's more of like situational awareness, which is very important too.
Yeah. Well, the reason I mention that because I have a black belt in the martial arts. Yeah. And I always remember that one of our sensei, my instructor, my sensei, and he always said to us, he said, the number one thing is being aware of your surroundings. He says, and that's what he always said. He said, be aware. I mean, use your instinct, use your gut. But if you sense something's wrong, take that for what it is. And I'm, maybe here's I'm going to throw it back to you because to me, emotional intelligence can also be tied into experience. I mean,
I would agree with that.
Because obviously you make the point of discipline. I would have to, say, for example, somebody's yelling, you're holding the line, let's say, on a protest, and you get yelled at everything in the book, and you got to stay there. How much of that is experience as much as anything else, knowing, okay, I've been through this before. And how much
that's a great point, Tom. But a lot of these young people, these young officers, these young, applicants that come to agencies, they don't have a lot of experience. They don't have a lot of life experience. Some do, but a lot don't. And then that's when we're kind of shifting, we're pivoting, and we're looking at their emotional side of it, and can they handle certain situations? That's why a lot of questions in the oral boards are designed towards that emotional intelligence. It's IQ too, but we want to see how they're going to react in certain situations. Are they going to let their emotions get the better of them, or are they going to stay calm? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But a lot of the applicants that we see in law enforcement, they don't have a lot of experience. Now, if we have somebody who has prior, military or law enforcement, then we can adjust accordingly. But a lot of them sometimes don't. A lot of them come out of college. I told you before, a lot of them are military, but a lot of them come out of college or don't go to college, and depending on what agency, they might have college requirements. But we're looking for a culmination. We want the best person out there. So.
Yeah. Well, here's okay. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you're on Twitter, you can tweet any questions at the Donelson Files, on Twitter. So if you have something, here's a very interesting comment from a friend of ours who listens to the show. Emotional intelligence is knowing you're hiring the one person who is going to see people on their worst days. And as she puts it,
I like that.
First responders rarely see people at their best.
That's a great point, and she's exactly right. It goes into that emotional intelligence like we've been talking about, Tom, is, nobody calls the police, and I talk about this all the time. Nobody calls the police when things are great. People call the police when what hits the fan. So she's exactly right. That's a great point for that listener.
Yeah. Now let's talk about what today in law enforcement. What are the biggest challenges facing law enforcement agencies?
Oh, there's so many, but I would say one of the biggest is attrition rates. There's a lot of people getting out of the profession, and it's difficult for many agencies to fill those vacancies. And all you have to do, Tom, is turn on the news and see what kind of environment that the law enforcement officers are dealing with, and often they're, chastised, belittled. They're called every name in the book. That's always been the case, but I think now it's and as an applicant out there, that's why I was going back before of what we were talking about. This really has to be a calling, because what person out there, and I thank God we have these brave men and women who are stepping up and they join the ranks every year. But just turn on the news. Who would want to deal with that? Who would want to be called a racist? Who would be a killer, a pig, everything else in the book? So I think the biggest challenge, and there's different challenges out there, but I think is getting good, qualified people to fill those positions that are vacating right and left. I talked to a friend of mine from a large agency. I won't name the agency back east, but they have 1,000 openings for police officers that they have a very difficult time filling. So that is a huge challenge for law enforcement going forward, and how we attract the smartest and the bravest and the people who want to serve. That's a tough thing right now. It's a tough environment.
Well, let me ask you this question. I mean, here's another. There was a program you mentioned, various community programs. Because I'm gonna put it this way. We on our show we kind of on our network we deal with a lot of variety of issues, and one of, to me, the biggest challenge I do see with police officers is dealing with that local community, and particularly, your poor communities where the relationship is not always there, and you got this distrust that exists between, let's say, the people you're protecting and you. And so kind of describe that aspect, and what can a police department do about that?
Great question. Community policing is the foundation of most agencies out there. And community policing, in a nutshell, Tom, is just having a good relationship, partnership with the community. You mentioned Shop with a Cop, Neighborhood Watch, barbecues. Those are all great tools and much needed. Law enforcement can't just sit in their car like a day's past and not get out and engage with the community and talk with business owners. So there's so many programs out there. When I was still on the force, I mean, a lot of ideas came from our younger officers that said, hey, why don't we, so here's an example, we created a liaison program in my department where officers twice a week would go to, they would divide up the city, and one day, or one day they would work on businesses in one part of the city, and the next day they would work on businesses in the other part of the city, basically where these officers would go out and create relationships with the business owners in the community. Those are much needed, even in times like this where it's inroads in some communities. We still have to go out there and create those relationships, because the bottom line, Tom, and I tell people this all the time, I tell cadets that I teach and people, we are in the hospitality business. No, we're not a hotel, but we are in the hospitality business, and that we have to be able to make those connections with community members if we want them to call when stuff goes wrong. We can't. I mean, people aren't going to call anybody, call the police, like you said, and you're exactly right, if they don't trust their law enforcement. Now, are you going to reach everybody? Is everybody going to trust you? Absolutely not. But we have to keep up with those community programs and get out there and get out of our cars, talk with community members, listen to them. That goes a long way, believe it or not.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, of course. This just popped in my mind. I know we didn't talk about this, but one of the thoughts I have in my own mind is there are a lot of small communities, or a lot of communities or towns where basically a good a percentage, 10, 20, 30% of the revenues come from like traffic tickets.
Mm-hmm.
And the question I'm going to throw back to you is, how comfortable should we be when we're basically asking the police officers, not just, obviously you want to give out tickets if they're bad driving and that, but do you want to basically base revenues on the idea that police officers are kind of de facto tax collectors? And how does that kind of go into the the process of let's say community relationship? Because if the local city board, if the local city council says, hey, we're down 10,000 this month, the pressure is go find some more tickets. I'm not saying that's what an officer would do, but certainly you are put in a position of being a tax collector. And how does that impact your relationship?
Well, I think it could, depending on the agency and the community, it could have a huge impact. Look, if agencies out there are struggling with revenue, I think that there's other things that you can do to kind of make up those shortfalls. And a lot of agencies, let me put it this way. A lot of people out there think that when agencies there's a shortfall in revenue that they tell the police to go out there and write tickets. In some agencies, that might be the case. I can tell you right now, I didn't come from agencies that was the case. Officers have discretion. We didn't have to write 10 tickets a day or something like that. It never was like that. Some agencies are going to be different. Some agencies might say, yeah, go out there and write 10 tickets. Other agencies, they don't care. It's really going to depend on the community and the agency. But to your point, Tom, I don't think that does anything to build those community relationships if you're telling officers to go out there and basically taking the discretion out of the officers, because now they have to write so many tickets in order to be in compliance with the agency. When you take that discretion out of the officers, you're going to have problems within the community, especially in really, really small communities. And I agree with you. If people are out there violating the law, and they deserve a ticket, they deserve a ticket. But officers shouldn't be tasked with going out there and finding a certain amount of violations just to meet a quota. It's not going to do anything for relationships. Find other ways to make up that money.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point because, when you look at some of the issues that come up, that's like one issue that you do it. And to me, if there's a perception, or if you're so bad looking at if you're the citizen, you're looking at the city council, the budget, and they're like, it says 10% is coming from revenues from tickets.
Yeah.
The implication, I don't want to say police officers doing it, but the implication is that there's a quota there that has to be filled, and it's being filled on your back. And you're right. Yeah. I just think, to me, this is a bad way to raise revenues on one side and a bad way to put in place, trying to, if you got a community that you already got enough issues with, as we talked about, this is not a good way to build up that. Yeah.
And I agree. And officers are out there just doing what people are telling them to do. And all this comes, it just comes down, you know what they say about stuff floating down. The officers are just doing what they're being told to do. So my suggestions to, if a listener out there is living in a community where that is happening, go to your city council, and tell them, look, this is ridiculous. Those are, anybody can attend those council meetings for the most part, most times. And I would voice your frustration. But don't be mad at the police officer, because that man or woman are just doing what they're telling them, people are telling them to do, that's coming from on top. But if there's a quota out there and officers are coming from departments that have quotas and they have to go out there because their city council or their mayor or whatever is telling them to do so, go to the city council meeting, and voice your concern.
Yeah. And stay right there. This is Tom Donelson, the Donelson Files on the Batchelor News Radio Network. I'm with Patrick Fitzgibbons. We're talking about law enforcement. And again, on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
If you want to hear another view of the latest developments in Trump's Washington, listen to the Dr. Larry Show. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Dr. Larry is a former businessman, entrepreneur, college president, and author who provides background and context for current events and trends in politics, education, foreign policy, and religion from a conservative perspective. Tune in and hear the other side as Dr. Larry talks with Washington insiders exclusively on blogtalkradio.com and the podcast at the BachelorPadNetwork.com.
Now, the Dr. Larry Show follows the Donelson Files every Wednesday on the Blog Talk Radio. And also, I'm going to give you a chance. It's the Batchelor News.airtime.pro. You can get a list of our schedules. For example, the Donelson Files is played every 3 to 4 a.m. in the morning, and you can also listen to it 10 to 11 a.m. every day, Monday through Friday, followed by the Dr. Larry Show. And the Batchelor Pad is also playing every 6 to 8 p.m., also on the Batchelor News Radio Network. And you go, if you want to, again, get on and listen to the shows, it's the Batchelor News Radio Network. It is on the BachelorPadNetwork.com. And Batchelor spelled BATCHELOR, padnetwork.com. And you can listen to our show anytime. There's also, again, if you go to our schedule, you can get a schedule of when you want to listen to the show at your convenience. So we're on at least 12 times a week, and if you want to listen to us even more, you got a chance to do that as well. So, and now we're going to return back to our guest, Patrick Fitzgibbons. And again, very briefly, remind everybody about your book.
Well, thanks again, Tom. My book is a micro book that's coming out very, very soon. I'm very excited about it. It's called Evolve. And it's a collection of routines, habits, and advice to take charge of your life to be your best self.
All right. We kind of last night we had a show on human trafficking, and I know you had a guest. It was the 1st of September, Kyle Rios, and I know that he's involved in that as well. So, can you kind of talk about that issue very briefly?
Yeah, we were talking about it a little off the air, Tom, before, and it's such an important topic that I think it goes unnoticed by millions of Americans in this great country because it's something that's not in front of us, obviously, every day. There is a black market out there, human trafficking, that is just horrible, obviously. Kyle Rios, good friend of mine, he's the national spokesman for Law Enforcement Today, with the largest online law enforcement publication out there. And I recently was talking to him, and we were talking about this. And again, it is just a huge problem within the United States, internationally, not just the U.S., that our brave men and women in federal agencies and municipal agencies are grappling with on a daily basis. But it is a huge problem that most people don't know even exists.
Well, because here's some of the things like I said, we had Nancy Hartwell last night at the show, and she was talking about just in the United States as an example. If you sit back and you look at some of the agricultural, some of these people picking fruit, are people who are there on, not necessarily voluntarily. They come across the border. In some cases, they're brought over by coyotes who then put them with less than reputable people. Nail salon, I know, is another area where literally, some of these nail salons in some of these major cities are occupied by workers who are not there voluntarily. They're essentially slaves. And saying they're like everywhere. So it's it's a lot more.
And it's horrible. I mean, you're not even talking about sex trafficking, which is another aspect of this, which is huge. I mean, it is horrible. That we live in a time now, the greatest country on earth, with all our technology and all the resources that we have, that this is still going on.
Well, as a kind of follow-up, because this came up last night, and we've discussed this on our show before. When Robert Kraft, the Patriots owner, got caught visiting a parlor of ill repute, it was found out that this was one of those places where indeed this was sex trafficking that this particular prostitution was in fact centering on. And so, if you want to kind of put it in a human face, you had basically a billionaire walking into someplace in Florida that, quite frankly, being serviced by people who are essentially slaves or sex there as part of sex trafficking.
Yeah.
I mean, the question I always had myself, why is this guy still the owner of the Patriots? But
yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and obviously there's a money component to that. I mean, he's got a lot of money, and I'm not saying that's right, but I think he should be held accountable, just like you or me would be held accountable. So I agree with you.
Yeah. All right. The other thing, I wanted to kind of touch base with you on is that, and this kind of goes back to the community side, and the efforts with prison reform, trying to get people back into society, and maybe and maybe trying to look, maybe in some cases, looking at crimes, who should be put in jail, who should be. The question I'm going to throw back, how is this going to affect policing? What you've read about the prison reform movement that's now there, how does that affect policing?
Well, I mean, it has the potential to have a tremendous effect on policing. Look, I mean, most people in prison, some people don't know this, but most people are going to get out of prison at some point, during their lives. I mean, very few people. I mean, there's only a handful of people, percentage, that are going to stay in prison for the rest of their lives. So people are going to get out. Now, the recent prison reform I've read, about the governor in California that are commuting, prison terms for violent offenders and stuff like that. I don't agree with that, because that's just going to create more work for law enforcement. Not like we don't have enough work, as it is. I mean, I'm all for letting people out of prison. Again, if they can prove that they're going to be productive members of society, and they have a plan. Just letting people out of prison, just to let them out of prison, is what I get with some of the stuff I'm reading, is not going to solve anything. Again, there's a high recidivism rate, Tom, and maybe your listeners know this. Recidivism means that if you're going back to prison. So, again, I think it's just more work for law enforcement in some circumstances by these politicians just doing the thing that, is going to get them voted back in. I think it could be more problematic for law enforcement and communities going forward.
Let's talk about another area, on the areas like drugs. You got the legalization of marijuana, as a movement. How does that change the way that law enforcement will start thinking about drugs, even though those communities were still legal? Does this kind of put in the back of your mind? Go ahead.
Great question. I'm from Colorado. We were the first state to legalize marijuana. And I'm just speaking from my perspective and my little neck of the woods here in Colorado. We didn't see this explosion in marijuana crime, and that some people predicted. Marijuana is a gateway drug. In a lot of instances, can lead to other things, but we still have more problems, Tom, with alcohol in this country than we have ever seen with marijuana, with cocaine, with all these heroin, fentanyl, and again, I'm not a cheerleader for marijuana, but in Colorado, the first state that legalized marijuana, we didn't see any kind of difference. I mean, I shouldn't see any kind of difference. We did see a little bit of difference in arrests being made for people driving under the influence of marijuana, because they thought it was great if they had a medical marijuana ID and they were exempt from driving under the influence. They thought that was, but you get past that. So, but again, I think we still have more problems with all these other drugs than we ever did with marijuana.
Well, a quick question on that, because you make the word gateway. I've always had my own theory that marijuana was as much of a gateway, not so much because of the compound of drugs, is the fact that when you're in a legal business, you're getting something illegally. You're basically dealing with illegal people and other illegal drugs, and it's almost like, okay, I think of Prohibition. One of the aspects that people don't realize about Prohibition is that before Prohibition, beer and wine was the drink of choice. Once they got Prohibition, they basically went to the harder liquor, because you were paying the same amount for both. You had a monopoly, which is basically, in those days, the mob, controlling it, controlling the price. And so that didn't matter whether you got a whiskey or a beer. They were going to cost the same, and the penalty will be the same thing. You know, you're dealing with people who, while they're at it, hey, why are you going to try this, try that? Whereas as a gateway drug, to me, that was a thought to me. To me, it was a gateway drug as much to the illegal side of the equation as opposed to the, the need to get a high. Maybe that's my theory. I don't know if you agree with that or disagree.
No, I agree. I mean, it's one of those subjects that there's both sides, but I agree with you. That's a great summation.
Yeah. And okay, this is Tom Donelson, Donelson Files on the Batchelor News Radio Network, and I'm with my guest Patrick Fitzgibbons. Next week, hopefully everything will work out. Coco Konski, my co-host, will be back and joining us. And so let's listen to a couple of great programs on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Hello, this is Sandy Eason, the host of Sandy's Secrets. Come and join us, where we will be talking about women's issues of sexuality, sensuality, and self-love. We'll be coming soon, exclusively on the Batchelor Pad Radio Network.
Join Barry Barnes for Locker Talk on the Batchelor Pad Network as he presents NFL news and evaluates players. Fridays at 9 a.m. Eastern at blogtalkradio.com.
Yeah, Barry Barnes, 9 a.m. Friday, but also if you go on the BachelorPadNetwork.com, on the Batchelor News Radio Network, you can also listen to Barry noon on Saturday, and also 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday. So you got enough opportunities, and of course, in the case of Sandy Secrets, just go to the BachelorPad.com, go to the Batchelor News Radio Network, and all of these programs will be available to you. Just simply click in Donelson Files, Dr. Larry, Locker Talk, the Batchelor News Show, Sandy Secrets. It's all there for your choice. So you got plenty of opportunities to listen to one of the fastest growing radio news network, where we can get you your show any way you want it, live, or just simply when you want to come back and listen to, like, for example, you'll want to re-listen to this show because I think we're getting some really good information dealing with law enforcement. I'm going to kind of change the subject a little bit into gun rights and gun control, and maybe I'll put it this way. What's your feeling overall?
That's a great question. It's a very controversial topic, Tom. I mean, I come from a military and law enforcement background. I'm a believer in the Second Amendment. I think if people want to own guns and possess guns, they should be able to do that without government interference. But the flip side of that is, yeah, we have to keep we have gun laws. A lot of people think, we don't have any gun laws. We do. We have a lot of guns laws on the books. But I am a proponent of gun rights in this day and age, and I always have been.
All right, let me ask a quick question. What does it take to become a gun owner in Colorado? If I wanted to be able to purchase a gun, do they have concealed weapons in Colorado? I mean, what's the law? First of all, I want to buy a gun. What do I have to do to get to be able to be a gun owner in Colorado?
Well, it's the same in most states, Tom. I mean, first you have to go, and if you want to purchase a gun, they do a background check and make sure that you're not some felon or criminal, or you haven't been in contact with law enforcement. If you haven't been put on any mental health codes and stuff like that, that's probably going to prohibit you from owning a firearm. But if you want to go buy a firearm in Colorado, it's the same in most states. They run you through NCIC, CCIC, make sure that you're not a criminal, and it's you can buy a weapon. As far as CCWs or a concealed weapons permit, that's people in Colorado can apply for a concealed weapons permit. Usually those are given and granted by the sheriffs, within the county. They can grant it, but it's an application process. Same thing. They do another background check. You have to be proficient You have to show that you're proficient in the firearm that you want to carry. So, it's Colorado has the same kind of criteria that a lot of states have.
Okay, let me put this. You say they have to be proficient. That means they have to basically go to a range and demonstrate to the sheriff, I can shoot this gun. Is that what you?
Yeah, they have to go through. Usually, when you want to get a concealed weapons permit, you have to go through a course, and you have to shoot at a range by a qualified instructor, and then you give that proficiency or that certificate to the sheriff, where they can say, all right, you're proficient in, how to deal with malfunctions of a weapon, how to, that you can shoot properly. So it's not the same standard like, law enforcement or military goes through, by no means, but you have to be able to show proficiency in that weapon.
All right. There's another subject that you covered. I know this is kind of a morbid subject, but this was on your podcast about death. Yeah. Coming to grips with death. And I know that, obviously there's always that risk with a law enforcement agency. You won't be back. But I thought there was, I think it was Bronnie Ware was the lady who you interviewed.
It's not ringing a bell. I was talking about, kind of regrets, a couple. In a recent show, I talked about death where, I'm sorry. That's the author who wrote it. I apologize, Tom. But the whole purpose of doing that show was, it's a dark topic. It's a somber topic, death. But the whole purpose of doing that show was to talk about living your life to the fullest and going after your dreams and what you want to do with your life. And where death comes into that is most people, this particular author that you talked about, she worked in hospice. She was a nurse for several years, and she worked with people at the latter stages of their life. And one of the reoccurring themes that came up with, all the time with people who were facing death and mortality was, they were facing regret and things that they didn't, do in their life. And a lot of that is we all deal with, I wish I would have had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life of others expected of me. I think a lot of people can, relate to that a lot of people out there are not living their true life. They're living what somebody else thinks they should be doing. Another one is I wish, I hadn't worked so much. I'm not saying you don't have to go out there and make a living and pay the bills, but look, nobody says on their deathbed, Tom, that they wish they would have worked more. What they say is, I wish I would have spent time with the people that I love. I wish I cultivate more relationships. I would have loved more. And that was the whole purpose behind the podcast, because I think it resonates with anybody, no matter what you're doing out there. I think we need to be living lives or we're not living in regret. And it's tough for a lot of people to do that. But we only have this one life, my friend, and there's no repeats. So why not live the life to your fullest?
Okay. Now let's talk about your policing itself. We had a kind of a conversation beforehand, and you kind of made a very interesting point that what you see on television is not what is representative of it, or as maybe, like 90%, it's like that 10% where you knock down the door, but 90% is, I guess you could use the word boring. Driving, family relationship, doing the paperwork. So kind of briefly talk about what's a typical police officer's day.
A lot of what, police, and I talk to officers from all around the country, all around the world, and a lot of officers, it's just, patrol. It's getting out, like we talked about before. It's talking to people. It's that presence, being that deterrent. If somebody sees a cop, oh, geez, it's that presence of that police officer. A lot of it is, that's what it is, Tom. Hollywood is great, and that's Hollywood. That's the reason why we're there, because they like to show, even cop shows. I don't even watch those shows because they're not really realistic. Yeah. They're just driving around fast all the time. That's a percentage of what an officer's day is, but it's not reflective of what they're doing all the time. A lot of it is, like you said, paperwork. A lot of it is going out there, patrolling, dealing with community issues, things like that. So, I would just caution people to, if they're listening, if you're watching Law and Order or you're watching some cop show, to be cognizant of the fact that's not a true reflection of what law enforcement does on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, because we get this image of it, but basically it sounds like to me it's basically I'm not using the word. It's tedious work followed by 10 seconds of excitement that could make a difference.
Yeah, it's like
whatever.
Yeah, I remember growing up in the profession, it was 80% of boredom and then 20% of sheer panic. However you want to phrase it. So.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that somebody once said that sounds like a soccer game.
That's probably a good analogy. It's a tough job. I mean, our brave men and women out there are doing a great job, especially in this environment.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I'll tell you quick. I'm gonna go on a little bit different subject here. I'm gonna say, Pam, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Okay. Now, Pam, give a quick brief of your background, because you've worked in law enforcement over your career.
Oh man, I've been retired since '07. I was part of an emergency response team for the state of South Carolina, and I worked with I worked with the criminal element. I had to go to police academy back a long time ago.
Okay, here's a quick. I mean, like I said, I'm gonna throw you both on the spot on this one, because I guess the latest in the Jeffrey Epstein is I cannot think of the gentleman's name, but now he's saying the evidence will point to.
Oh, Baden, the pathologist.
Baden,
yeah.
The pathologist, and I know your original assessment was suicide most likely was the cause, based on obviously what you read. I mean, that's.
Yeah, from the information that they gave us at the time and everything. Yeah, it looked like a suicide. Every indication of what they said happened to the bones and things like that in the neck. Yes, it could have happened, and I said pretty much he set it up to do a suicide. If you look at it in the big picture, it was clinical. He gave his possessions away pretty much by doing the will before. Yeah, I guess you're talking about the little text I put today, like, follow the money.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Because that was I did. I kind of wanted to follow your text because I mean now it's I guess you're going to get into another series of conspiracies.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, here's the thing. If anybody wants to do the research, they can. Nobody has to believe me because I'm not going to say I'm a pathologist nor am I an expert. However, believe it or not, you're talking to a fellow from Colorado, correct, tonight?
Yes.
Yeah, well, the University of Colorado, I read an article by the physicians from the Denver Health, University of Colorado School of Medicine, and they did a very, very, very extensive article in the Journal for Emergency Physicians Monthly, and focused on clinical strangulation and hanging injuries. When I saw the text, and it's not verified that this guy actually said this or anything. I haven't chased down his actual statement or anything like that. But it said that he had not ever seen petechia in somebody's eyes, which is the bleeding in the eyes from a hanging. And I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, excuse me, I have. I don't know where you are from, but I have. And this was the craziest thing I ever heard. And so I jumped off on that. I wait a minute. Then I found out the fellow was hired by, the attorneys, and I was thinking of a bigger picture. But yeah, the petechia, the bleeding in the eyes, is very common in that, but it is common sometimes in a strangulation also, However, UCLA did a 10-year study on cervical spine fractures and in hangings, particularly in hanging suicides. And strangulations, and found out that in 5%, it is also common that you're going to find cervical spine and this is voluntary hangings. This is not, not judicial hangings, okay? And they said that also not uncommon was fractures of bony and cartilaginous structures. It's more common is a hyoid bone getting fractured, but it is not uncommon for the other laryngeal fractures to occur. And these people, these doctors put this down very, very clearly in their article. And I just, I had already saying, wait a minute, I have seen this in people who have hung themselves. So I don't know how this gentleman didn't, unless he's just a pencil pusher. And then
Okay, Patrick, what's your thoughts?
I'm not an expert. I mean, I do think it's ironic with Epstein that, the day he supposedly committed suicide, there wasn't a guard that was working. The security cameras were suddenly turned off. They weren't working. It's no doubt that Epstein he died with a lot of secrets. He was connected with some of the most powerful people in the world. I'm not saying that he didn't commit suicide, but that in law enforcement we like to call red flags. I don't know what happened to him. I'm not a pathologist, like your guest said. I'm not an expert, but it's fishy to me. And again, I don't know the case in its entirety, but I think it's just kind of weird the way he died, and the fact the circumstances surrounding it is just fishy. And what's baffling to me, Tom, is nobody's talking about this anymore. I mean, you see a little blurb about it in the news here and there, but it's kind of like, oh well, that's gone. Nothing to see here.
Yeah. Well, like I say, it's now off the news. Yeah. All right, listen, I want to thank Pam for adding, because I wanted to bring her, because I know we talked about this in a previous episode, dealing with, because she does a lot of work on cold cases. And so it just kind of struck me because she did this, she did her tweet today, and she said, follow the money. So in other words, we're not speculating or conspiratorial. We're just simply, these are all things that one can look at. All right, we got just about 3 minutes left, so I want to give you an opportunity to first talk about your podcast, talk about your book, and how people can get a hold of you. So sell yourself.
Well, I appreciate it again, Tom, for having me on the show. I really do. The podcast is called CJ Evolution. You can find it at cjevolution.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to reach out to me, there's ways you can do that. I also do personal coaching, life coaching. You can find information again on the podcast, cjevolution.com. And like you said, Tom, I have a book out there coming pretty soon. It's called Evolve. It works in conjunction with my coaching, and it's a micro book. And those are just habits and routines and tidbits that I've learned over the years in a career in law enforcement, and some of the takeaways that I have learned, as well as some of the nuggets of information and habits and great things that I've learned from having some of the best guests in the world on my show. And that book will be available pretty soon. It's with the editor right now, getting printed out in hard copy, and as soon as I have it, you will know about it on the website, cjevolution.com. So thank you so much.
All right, and also, again, just kind of remind everyone, cjevolution.com. Do you do a podcast every day, or how often do you update your podcast?
I usually try to push out a couple shows a week, and again, I'm up to about 330 shows right now, and I've had, they're all amazing guests, but just amazing people that have come on the show. I had Eli Crane on the show a while back. Eli Crane is an ex-Navy SEAL. I got a lot of military that come on, but he was on Shark Tank and started up a company that Mark Cuban actually backed. So a lot of people out there that just continue to give back to law enforcement, the military, and I'm just very proud of the show. So,
well, thank you very much. I don't mean to, like I say, we're basically right on the cups of time here. So I want to first of all thank you, sir, for being on this program, taking your time, and at Donelson File on Twitter. We'll give you all the information you need to re-listen to the show and the links to the show. And I will want to come again next week, next Tuesday. Just keep an eye. We'll have our guest and what the program will be. So just keep your eyes on, because the news is moving fast, and we got a lot of a lot of guest possibilities, folks. So this is Tom Donelson, Donelson Files, and Batchelor News Radio Network saying good night.
When you hear that trumpet, you know it's the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor News Radio Network. I'm Dr. Larry Fedewa, and I'm your host for the hour. Tonight we are talking about the whole issue of the results and the progress of the drama that is taking the attention of the entire city of Washington and inside the Beltway, as they say, and really is not nearly as concerning to the population as a whole yet. But there are some very disturbing things that are starting to emerge from this latest example of the Democrats' really a very almost insane hatred of the current president. Among the many absurd accusations being carelessly hurled around by the Democrats these days is the most absurd of all, and that is that the president is violating the Constitution. In fact, we are seeing another example of the left's habit of accusing the president and conservatives in general of committing the very crimes that they themselves have actually committed. The most egregious example of this behavior is the Democrats' accusation that the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians to overthrow the 2016 election, when in fact the Clintons and their campaign had a long and very profitable influence peddling scheme going on, using the Clinton Foundation as their cover, to the tune of over $100 million. Even the Mueller fiasco could not find evidence of Trump involvement. In this case, Nancy Pelosi, through Adam Schiff, Gerald McNadler, and their cohorts, have all but destroyed any U.S. president's ability to carry on foreign policy. What leader of a foreign government is going to want to talk confidentially with the American president when they have a well-founded fear of their conversation being broadcast to the public? And the same goes for American diplomats. And what about the president talking to his own people? Executive privilege is a necessary prerogative in order for the president to perform his job of leading this massive administrative state. The Dems are heedlessly trying to destroy this necessary shield by their subpoenas of the administration officials to present testimony against their own boss. In this, they have so far been aided by the feckless judiciary, and if there does not arise some respect for the office of the president on the part of higher courts, the very exercise of executive privilege will become the high misdemeanor that the Dems are looking for in order to undergird their accusations of impeachment. The most drastic move of the zealots in the House is their attempt to place their own judgment of the president's legitimacy over that of the American people by attempting to overthrow the sitting president before an already scheduled election less than a year hence. If this is not a blatant attempt to exercise raw power, it will do until a military coup comes along. To make matters worse, the proceedings have been conducted in secret. While the procedures leading to impeachment are not prescribed in any detail in the founding documents of the Republic, probably because the founders never envisioned a serious attack on the president's right to exercise his office, there have been procedural precedents set by the three other impeachment efforts in American history. That is, Andrew Johnson in 1867, Richard Nixon in 1974, and William Clinton in 1996. These procedures constitute due process and cannot in good conscience be abandoned without adequate substitutes. Due process of law is guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. Surely the President of the United States is due the same rights as any other citizen. In this regard, there is another precedent being abandoned by these outlaws, namely the secrecy of grand jury proceedings. Schiff is demanding that the seal of secrecy which exists for the grand jury, grand juries, which heard the accusations of the Mueller investigation, be broken and made public. And, unbelievably, an Obama federal judge has so ordered. This means that the ultimate decision as to the further action against the defendant, which has already been made by a properly constituted grand jury, can now be exploited by a group of politicians whose motives are suspect at best. And the witnesses may be summoned before Congress on the basis of prior testimony. Our already flawed judicial system stands to be further compromised. In summary, the United States cannot tolerate, first, a presidency which does not have the necessary tools to perform its sworn obligations to the American people. Secondly, a judicial system which does not protect the anonymity of those who give testimony in grand jury proceedings held to determine whether or not to prosecute a defendant who is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Or, thirdly, a president who is subject to the whims of any bureaucrat who wishes to cause him trouble and schemes with a powerful House committee chairman under the cloak of anonymity. Nor, finally, an assault against the president's fitness to serve while denying him the benefit of due process. These people have to be stopped before they bring down our Constitution and our democracy for future generations. And now I'd like to introduce our guest for the evening, is Joe Mangiacotti, who is a man of many talents and interests. He's known primarily as the lone conservative voice in liberal Boston. And as the host of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on WCRN every Saturday and Sunday. But Joe also holds an MBA and a PhD in psychology, as well as an MA in real estate and a real estate license, and he's also a notary public. In his spare time, Joe is president and resident manager of CIS and Associates, Inc., which is a second-generation private detective agency in Massachusetts, where he continues to run the agency started by his dad, mom, and himself in 1986. He has also served as a constable and deputy sheriff, and finally, Joe is also an investor and turnaround specialist for several businesses. Joe, what do you do when do you sleep at night?
Wow. I don't know if I can live up to that introduction, Dr. Larry. Wow. That's fantastic. A lot of people do say I'm probably the busiest guy they know.
Well, I think I can understand that. Your record certainly seems to show that. So, what do you think about the subject at hand, which is the possibility of permanent damages to the Constitution and the presidency by what these guys are doing?
Yeah, I think you're right on. This is absolutely damaging the Constitution. They're also they're tying the hands of this president, which means that they're going to tie the hands of future presidents as well. And I think they have to remember, Larry, is that every time they pull one of these just unprecedented end runs on this president, they're setting up, for the time that you guys at the White House. There's a precedent for it. And, I think you said it in your opening, and I'm sure if not, you've said it before, that this all stems from their inability to accept the results of the 2016 election, that it has been a concerted effort to undo those results, which is a collective slap in the face of every American who participated in the election of 2016. And, look at the movement to do away with the Electoral College because it didn't go their way. Their answer from the Democrats isn't to get a policy or develop policies, have an issue, do the work. It is to change the system in our favor.
Well, hold that thought, Joe. This is the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
I want to feel the heat with somebody. Yeah, I want to dance with somebody who loves me. Ooh, ooh.
Alexa, play Whitney Houston.
Okay.
With Amazon Music, a voice is all you need. Get access to over 50 million songs. Download the Amazon Music app today.
Blog Talk Radio.
This is the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor News Radio Network. And I'm talking to Joe Mangiacotti. Joe, you were talking about the effort right since even before the inauguration of the deep state trying to dislodge or overtake or substitute their judgment for that of the American people, and the Electoral College is part of that. But the thing that is just so amazing is that is this really almost manic hatred of the president. Particularly, it seems like the belly of the beast is in the intelligence and in the FBI and part of the Obama Justice Department, and that really is an extremely troubling situation, because the intelligence community, really, we rely on them for an awful lot of our information and input and even action.
Is to protect the American way, to protect the Constitution, to protect its citizens. That's the biggest thing that we rely on our intelligence agencies to do, is to preserve our way of life and to preserve our government, our Constitution. I mean, to have the intelligence agencies partaking in anything, any shadow or hint of undermining a sitting president, never mind, look, they tried to infiltrate people into the Trump campaign. They spied on him as a candidate. As a president-elect, they continued it, and then continued as president. I mean, we saw the text, right? The insurance policy and so forth. But you're also talking about, tools that were used in a previous administration wasn't above. I mean, they weaponized the IRS against party like the Tea Party organizations or any conservative organizations. He spied on journalists. These are all things that he gets a pass by the mainstream media on. So we know that the administration prior to this administration, it was not beyond them to weaponize agencies of the federal government for his own bidding. We know that. We have a history of it. We have examples that we can point to, and the more that we learn, and I got to tell you, the moving or changing the once kind of inquiry into the origin of the dossier and the 2016 elections being turned into a criminal investigation recently.
Yeah,
it's huge.
Well, we want to get to that in a minute, but I guess one of the things that I think is underestimated in this regard is that the intelligence community provides a lot of the information that on which presidents and diplomats and the military base a lot of those actions that you referenced, namely the protection of the American interests abroad, and to some extent, if there was the overlooking. So the question is, why are they so adamant against? What is it that they have so much against the president? And the conclusion that I have come to is that they basically have such a vested interest in the foreign policy of internationalism and the Cold War that they just can't see beyond it, and he stands against it all. And they were smart enough to see that if he ever got it, that they were going to have to make a major change in their entire orientation, and they just flat didn't want to do that. But what's your thought on that?
Carrying on that is that I think that across the board, the intelligence agency, the Beltway, everybody within the Beltway, the entire Washington elite didn't know how to deal with Donald Trump, period, because this is a guy who made it to the highest office in the land, who on his very first time running for anything got it, and it happened to be the presidency of the United States. And this guy comes in beholding to nobody, beholding to no special interest groups, never playing the game, right? He never worked his way up through a Senate or governorship or anything of that nature. And his talk was plain and simple, and it was to clean up the swamp. It was, a very much a new sheriff is in town type of talk and attitude. And I think that scared the bejesus out of the establishment. And they still look at him. As far as they're concerned, he's a buffoon and an idiot, and he doesn't have the pedigree to be here, much less in the Oval Office. And nobody wanted to deal with an unknown character like this. They liked the way it was. I think it's more than that. I think it's more than that. I think that they, these guys, a lot of these guys, they went into government 30 years ago, and they made more money in either in the bureaucracy or even in politics than they had been making before they got in there. And 30 years later, they come out as multimillionaires. Yeah. And I think that there is a lot of, people talked about corruption and graft. Sometimes it doesn't show itself in the most obvious ways, but I think there is just an attitude that these people want to be, that they want power, and if they can't have money, they want power, and if they're really successful, they get both. But I know people in the establishment, in the intelligence establishment. They're not just the top people like in the FBI.
They are, but they also are very anti-Trump, and it is really true in the State Department as well. And it's just I guess it's the only thing I can think of is that these people are just so wed to their worldview of America as the savior of the world and the policeman of the world and the imperial presence of the United States wherever it's not communism, that they just can't get over that. I don't know if that explains it, but at least that's the only explanation I can really come up with. You're a psychologist. What do you think?
I think that we're saying kind of the same thing. Is that these people are? This is the way it has always been, and this is the way that we want it, and we don't want anybody changing that for us. And these, as far as all these bureaucrats and all of the establishment goes, you're right. A lot of these people who they've been in government for many years, and the whole concept is they need a big government, and they need us to be doing everything we're doing because it gives them purpose. And it's just what they know. It's what they do. As far as,
well, plus it gives them power.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of these people, they have, there are 7 types of power, and situational power is one of them. And a lot of these guys and women have situational power, and that's their fiefdoms, and they like that, and they don't want anybody messing with that. As far as you said something about, them coming into office, and this has always been a problem I've had. It fascinates me, especially when the left is calling for this president's tax returns and documents, and it's like, wait a minute, this is a guy worth $4.something billion. He's lost about $1 billion in wealth since becoming president, and it's not his tax return. I'm talking. What about the person who was basically had a net zero or probably in debt when they went into, say, the House of Representatives, into Congress, and 3 terms later they're worth 7 or 8 figures? That's the tax return I want to see. Because how do you do that on $174,000 a year? Well, you maintain 2 homes, one in your district, one in D.C., and you do all that you do. How do you become worth $8, $10, $20 million in a few terms on $174,000? Because that's pretty good money management. I think I'm pretty good with money management, but I'd have a thing or two to learn from those people. So I'd like to see those tax returns. So you're 100% okay, Dr. Larry. Something's not right.
That kind of brings us around to this latest scuttlebutt that Joseph Biden was asking various government agencies to support the various efforts of his son's lobbying organization, and that he made telephone calls and left a paper trail that is now being slowly unwound by this guy. What's his name? The prosecutor for the Justice Department, Durham.
Yeah.
And that is really, and that some of that's going to come out, if not Biden himself, certainly some of the other people in this Inspector General's report that's due next week, and that is going to be interesting.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Larry, I mean, what people are now seeing that went on with Hunter Biden, okay, is something that's been going on in D.C. for a lot of years. I mean, the Clintons created the foundation, right? The Clinton Foundation. They even created a Clinton Foundation in Canada so that they could avoid the reporting requirement. So that these countries like Ukraine, Russia, Middle East countries actually made the donations of hundreds of millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation in Canada, who then transferred it to the Clinton Foundation in the United States, thereby forgoing any of the laborious reporting regulations that we have in this country, because it was just a transfer of money from that foundation to this foundation. You see what I'm saying? So they had that. Biden's just cut out the foundation. They just here's the Biden, put him on your board. And,
before we get to the Russian uranium thing, let's take a break. And this is the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Recovery Month has become widely recognized and does an outstanding job of celebrating recovery, increasing awareness, and acknowledging the amazing work of providers, advocates, people in recovery, and their families. I believe our work together is helping many Americans better understand, seek out, attain, and sustain recovery. What began as a small and very good idea has grown into a national, mainstream, sustained, and systematic public education and support effort, all focused on the message that people recover. Getting the message of recovery right is critical because people take action based on what they hear and see, and most importantly, what they experience. Experience shapes our knowledge, our values, our attitudes, our beliefs, and our action. Of those who recognized their need for treatment but didn't receive care, the number one reason was no health coverage and could not afford the cost. No one in need should be denied the opportunity for treatment and recovery in our country.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor News Radio Network. And Joe, you were getting to the Clinton Foundation in Canada, and from there we go rather quickly to the uranium fiasco of where the Russians ended up with 20% of America's uranium.
Now, that was uranium one. And that was just one example of many of the things that Hillary Clinton did as Secretary of State. We can find a lot of examples of her pressuring and even hurting American businesses so that businesses from certain countries were able to flourish here. And in essence, she sold the Secretary of State's office. So that is why Ukraine, Russia, and a lot of countries wanted her in the Oval Office, because she already demonstrated that she'd sell the Secretary of State's office to the highest bidder. Why wouldn't she sell the Oval Office to the highest bidder? So this really upset the apple cart in so many ways, right? This was not supposed to happen. All of those favors and debts that were incurred by people donating, $100 million, $200 million to the Clinton Foundation, and the next thing, Bill Clinton gets 2 speeches for $500,000 apiece from Russian oligarchs after they donate to the Clinton Foundation. Right. And as soon as he knows, and now we found through some of the leaking emails where she's actually said, "Hey, confirmation. Did that donation come in? Did they make that donation? Yeah, okay. So it was for sale." So now, when she didn't become president of the United States, in reality, I think in her mind, she actually thinks she did win. They're like, wait a minute, you can't make good on all of these favors we did. We donated all this money. Now you can't pay us back. You're not the president of the United States. If anybody in the Soviet, whether it's Russia or Ukraine or what have you, Trump is the last person that they wanted to be president. There was an article in Politico, back in 2017 that outlined Ukraine's efforts to tilt the election towards Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump. And that gets glossed over. There's been effort to bury this. You can still find it. It's a Politico of 2017. And why wasn't that all over the headlines in this country? Why was it okay? It's okay when the Democrats do these things. I don't know if you said it earlier, but it seems that everything that the left accuses, whether it's Donald Trump or just the right or conservatives, is exactly what they're doing. It's as if, it's funny in the sense that, you mentioned second-generation private investigator, and it's a business I've been in a long time, since I was a teenager. And one thing I noticed very early, when it came to the fidelity cases, Dr. Larry, I'd get this client who would approach the agency and tell me that their wife is carrying on probably and really needs to just look into it. And so often I realized that the wife wasn't doing anything. She was having lunch with her girlfriends and riding the horse at the, down at the stable and just doing whatever a suburban housewife do. And it was he who is the adulteress out there carrying on. And he transferred the fact that he could do this and he was kind of this scummy person, that he projected it onto his wife. And I see this, it's like, well, this is what's happening, that the Democrats are doing these things, and they realize that they can be done, and they just assume that the right's doing it, and they're projecting these on to Donald Trump and conservatives in general. And it's just enough is enough, and they've got to be called on this stuff, man.
Well, it takes a Republican government, controlled government, to do that, and we're about to decide whether that's going to happen in 2020. So, but before we leave this whole issue, I want to talk a little bit more about that. But in fact, I think the connection, in my estimation, the connection between the current impeachment effort in the House and the 2020 election, I think is very closely connected. In that, if they cannot really, the idea that they're going to really end up with a conviction in any impeachment trial in the Senate is very remote at this point. Has been right along. Mm-hmm. But so why are they doing it, and why are they doing it now? It seems like the main thing that they're really standing to gain is to so discredit this president that he can't get reelected, and that therefore is the battle that's going on. It's really a battle for the American public, the approval of the American public, and toward that end, now we've got this whole thing that Pelosi's latest move, in that she's calling now for a vote of the House on the impeachment idea, but we're still actually that's scheduled for tomorrow, isn't it?
It is scheduled for tomorrow, and this is wow.
What about the details?
Well, she's trying to say that this is not an impeachment vote. Don't fall for that. It is actually an impeachment vote, but she doesn't want to call it the impeachment vote because she has those Democrats in those very delicate districts that either have traditionally been Republican and they happen to have a fluke and get elected in the midterm election, or it's a very close. And she doesn't. These people are really complaining to her. They don't want to have to go back to their district and explain why they voted for impeachment. So what she's calling this is a vote on impeachment and inquiry, but it is actually an impeachment vote because it's outlining. And I don't know if you have a chance to read it. I'm going to post it on to my site. But the resolution is actually an outline of the proceeding of impeachment, which is in essence what the founding fathers said a vote is. So this is actually a vote for impeachment. It's not an inquiry into impeachment, but by calling it that, she's going to try to allow those members of the Democrats, members of the House, to walk that fine line and be able to go back to the district and say, I did not vote technically for impeachment. I just voted for the process. I just voted for the inquiry to get the facts. That's what she's doing with that. Okay. The other thing is, go ahead, Doug.
There's 36 of them. I mean, it's not an insignificant contingent. In fact, it's over what? Nearly 20% of the entire Democrat representation in the House. So that's right. Critical.
She has to, but Nancy Pelosi has been in a precarious position for a while now because she's had this squad who are out there, and is it the case of the tail wagging the dog? In that she's supposed to be speaker, but she's got these people out there who are just saying outlandish things and things that she never would normally she would never say herself. And I don't know if she really has the control over them that she has over the controlled, or that she has over the seasoned members of Congress who understand how things work. I mean, I don't think AOC knows how anything works. I mean, she put her foot in her mouth at a hearing today, or yesterday rather, when they were having, this one hearing, and she didn't think this through. And what I'm talking about is that the Democrats have been holding multiple hearings at the same time to divide the Republican representation. So not only have they tied the hands of Republicans at the hearings, not allowing them to ask questions and to cross-examine anybody who testifies in the skiff, which, by the way, is a whole other discussion. The fact that these proceedings are being held a couple floors underground in a skiff. What the heck is that about? That's not what a skiff is for. Not at all. That's not the purpose. And for those of you who are listening and you don't know what we're talking about when we say the skiff, a skiff is a secure room. A skiff is a room that has no electronics in it, no feeds into it. It's usually lined either in lead, copper, or what have you, or a mesh. So basically, it's like a Faraday cage. You can't get a signal in there. And that's for secure classified conversations. This is not a classified conversation. It is not supposed to be held, a couple floors underground in a skiff. It should be held in one of the many meeting rooms and chambers in the Capitol building. And all members of Congress should be able to enter and listen at any given time. The restrictions that have been placed on by Shifty Shift here are ridiculous. And I mean, the fact that she even took it away from Nadler and gave it to Shift, because Nadler has a poor history of being able to control a hearing and conduct a hearing in an effective manner, that she kind of, embarrassed them as far as I'm concerned. I'd be embarrassed if I was Nadler. Took it away from Nadler and gave it to Adam Schiff. And Adam Schiff, I mean, it's not like this guy is a paragon of virtue and integrity, especially after he pulled the reading of the transcript. I mean, they never thought in a million years, and this is another example, what I mean, that they totally underestimate this president at every turn. They never thought in a million years that he would release the transcript and the notes of that conversation.
Let's hold Adam Schiff for after the break. This is the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor Pad Radio Network.
Before Boost, our phone bill was obscene. So we switched to Boost and got lines for the whole family with unlimited gigs for a much more family-friendly price. It's nice to have a phone bill that doesn't require parental controls.
Your family deserves better. Get 4 lines for only $25 per line, each with unlimited gigs. Plus, get up to 4 free Samsung J7 perks with 6 months of Hulu, where you can stream all the shows everyone is talking about. All on the super reliable and super fast nationwide network. Boost makes it easy to switch. Switching makes it easy to save.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor News Radio Network, and we're talking to Joe Mangiacotti, the lone conservative voice of Boston. And
actually, there's a couple of us out here, and but not a lot. And for the talk show hosts, right? There are a few of us out here, but this is really a very Democratic bastion. It is. I mean, we usually vote different than the rest of the country does in Massachusetts. We have a very slanted, Democrat-heavy state legislature. We currently a Republican governor, and many would argue a Republican in name only. In that he very much behaves and votes as a Democrat governor probably would. So, it's as a lone conservative. There are a couple of us on the air out here, and thank goodness for that, because as one of my listeners said, that we're in an information war right now, and that he considers my show as one of those fighting in the information war.
Well, yeah, and that information issue leads right back to the foreign the foreign policy establishment and the intelligence community, as well as the domestic information network, which is the press. And it's just sort of amazing that people like Reagan and Trump ever even got elected as president with the way things are stacked against them. But let's take another look at 2020 and what do you, the other issue that's really a large issue at this point is still this matter of Syria and Turkey and the Kurds, and it appears that the Trump policy, or the Trump, I guess we would call it the strategy of trying to get a permanent separation, permanent no war zone between Turkey and Syria, that also protects the the Kurd boundaries from both not only the Turks but also the Syrians, and yet it seems like we're in the position of that is getting very close to being reality, even though most of the policing of the no war zone between the two countries is being done by the Russians and the Syrians. But that is an enormously significant enormously important development in the history of the Middle East, because this has been going on since World War I. And if he can make that happen,
yeah. Can you imagine having to give him credit for this?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. If he can make that happen, it's just amazing. Yeah. And it's sort of like getting the Saudis and the Israelis together. I mean, if you want to know what miracles look like, you just sort of do that. But it just seems to me that this reconstitution of the entire Middle East dilemma is actually coming about largely because of the Trump strategy, and and it could not be, it's never been done. It had not been done since they were all separated after World War I.
No, and it's going to kill the media to have to, and they won't. They'll spin it against them. They're not going to give them credit where credit's due. Even after the killing of al-Baghdadi the other day, you listen to Joe Biden and the other presidential candidates. As much as they praised our military servicemen and even our K9 Conan, the great job she did, they bent over backwards to leave Trump's name out of it and not to give the credit that was due for this. So they're certainly not going to give him the recognition that he deserves for this. And he's even talked about and he understands the power of as he said, our economic heft and might. And he knows if anybody knows how to leverage economic might, it's Donald Trump. And he's even talked about, look, these oil fields, we're going to seize those. We're going to take control of those oil fields, and we're going to use the money from those oil fields to secure for the Kurds, to give them the funding and the resources that they need. And that's where that money is going to come from. On top of all the time, by the way, we've got a president who's been telling NATO and countries around the world, by the way, hey, it's time for you to pay your fair share of the freight, by the way. Your UN bill, right. These countries that we've been protecting since World War II, hey, we're sending you a bill, and you're going to stop paying for this because you've been able to put all of your money and resources into your economy and into research and development and science and everything that you're draining the American taxpayer. Well, we're protecting your nation. and we're there, and it's. I mean, what president would ever have had the, to do that? The gumption, I guess, is the word I can use on air here, right? The gumption to say to these countries, you pay your bill, pay your fair share here. We're protecting the whole world, and nobody's paying for this except for the American taxpayer.
And it has definitely hurt our economy because a lot of a lot of the problems that we have in the economy today really come from the expenditure that we made in particularly in blood and treasure during that Cold War period, because we had the drain. First, we had the drain of capital for one thing, but and during that period, the inflation in America took away most of the wealth, redistributed it to the upper. Today, it used to be the upper 10%. Now it's almost the upper 1% of the population, compared to the other 98% of us who did not really participate at that. Certainly not at that level. And when you talk about the working class of people, they have not really had a tangible increase in buying power really since the 1970s, and that is a direct result of the way that our resources were drained from the United States and poured into other countries, and then of course that was exacerbated by the drain of when technology came along and made the movement of all our manufacturing into other countries. I mean, that obviously that sealed the deal. So the idea of trying to get all that back is really critical to the survival of the United States as a world power, because otherwise, our deficit is just going to kill us. We probably never can pay it back anyway. But
there's another example of the unfair tariffs that have existed for decades, right, against this country, and now again we're back to Trump, who's saying, "Hey, enough is enough," and even when it works, okay, a couple of weeks ago, when China lightened up on some tariffs, that didn't get the coverage it should have gotten. And, they turn around and they're buying incredible amounts of agriculture from the United States now, too. But again, he's not real. If he was any other president, he would have been praised on the mainstream media. You would have heard about it in at least a day or two news cycle. And he gets none of that recognition. But, he's coming along and he's saying, look, you can't have a 500% tariff on our items coming into your country, and we have nothing on your products coming in. And everybody's so worried that what's that going to do? And we got to pay more for my Game Boy or what have you. And you know what? Deal with it. Deal with that. There needs to be equity in the trade agreement. In this USMCA is a fantastic thing. It needs to continue and be voted on and get through. It's about time that we had a president who really got to the nuts and bolts of the economics of world and global economy.
Well, his response is really unique also, and that is these rallies that he has. I've never seen anything like it. But that is how he gets his message out, and of course the tweets. But the tweets get twisted pretty much, by the time that they ever get to the public. But we're at another time when we want to step aside for a minute. This is the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
I know they're looking. Everyone's staring. A scab from a cold sore is so embarrassing, you feel like everyone notices. Get new Campho-Phenique cold sore treatment for scab relief. The only one targeted for the scab, the worst part of a cold sore. Its special formula provides maximum strength pain relief. Plus, it seals in moisture to help prevent cracking, to promote healing. So now, you'll be noticed for other things.
Nice haircut, Lisa.
Campho-Phenique stops pain, promotes healing, ends embarrassment.
You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Batchelor News Radio Network. What do you think what do you think of his chances for re-election, and given what we know today?
Oh, I think it's absolutely it would be another electoral landslide if election was held today. I think that the Democrats in general, they knew, and they even said it, right? You had the congressman the one who said he was afraid that Guam was going to tip over if we put too much Navy stuff on it. His name is the idiot, but he said right out, look, we can't win in the ballot box. We can't win the election in 2020, so we have to impeach him. 19 minutes after the man took the oath of office and was sworn in 2017, the first article of impeachment and countering this president was published. So they know, and they've known for a long time, that they're not going to be able to win a fair and square election in 2020, and that he's going to win re-election. He'll be a second-term president, given all things as they are today, and that is why they have been working so tirelessly to undo him, or at least, see, they really thought that they were going to do what was done to Nixon. Nixon actually wasn't removed from office. They got him to resign. And they even got, Republicans went up to the White House and said,
Goldwater,
you need to do this. This guy is never, ever, ever going to do that. He is never going to resign this office. And the more that they attack him, he said it one time, in those, by the way, those rallies are just unbelievable. They're fantastic. And he said it, I think it was the Minneapolis rally I was watching. He said, they say this and they come after me. He goes, I don't know, maybe there's something wrong up there in the head. He goes, I thrive on it. And I just, it's the worst thing you can do to him, because he's a New York construction guy. When you break it all down, Larry, the guy is a New York construction guy, and that's how he can relate to blue collars and blue collar workers, as he has talked to these guys his entire life. And if you read or looked into the biographies of his family and his kids and stuff before he was even president, they all said the same thing. Him and his wives, they never treated their children as the children of billionaire real estate moguls. These kids worked.
Yeah, they were right out there on the job site.
Right. Eric worked on the dock. These kids flew, when they flew in coach, and they had he bought a mansion out in Long Island at one time. When the kids were 10, 12 years old. He didn't hire landscapers. He had Donald Jr. and Eric out there clearing the brush and cutting it away. So for all of the billionaire in the gold trim, right, and these embossed, helicopters, for crying out loud, he is a down-to-earth person on that, and he raised the kids that way, and everybody knows that. And even Hillary Clinton said one of the best things she could say about Donald Trump are his kids. They're all good, solid kids, and it's just they can't win. They know they can't win. If the election was held today, he would absolutely win. You're looking at him flipping a couple of the states like Minneapolis. There are 4 electoral votes there. He would, if the election was held today, I think he would do better than he did in the 2016 election.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, I think it's a little bit premature to be that optimistic, but because I think that, number one, things can happen in the meantime. A year is an eternity in politics.
If it was held today, no doubt he'd win it today.
And then the second thing is that there are blocks of voters that need to be penetrated, if not won over. And I think that the blacks and the Hispanics are of that importance.
Yes.
And I think that there is reason for them to be more sympathetic and more supportive of President Trump, and I think that some of that is happening. And if it continues to happen, then I would have to agree with your assessment. But unless it happens, I think that an awful lot also depends on who the Democrats end up nominating, because if they put out any of those people they have now, I can't see anybody there that's going to challenge him. But if you bring in a Bloomberg or Michelle Obama or somebody, I think that there's still opening.
All right. No, I agree 100%. Given the current field of Democratic presidential candidates, there isn't one person on there that's going to beat Trump in a general election, and that includes Hillary. Has been teasing with and throwing little jabs out there about coming back in. She said it a week or so ago in the interview that she was having, and she was asked about a rematch, and she said, "Oh, that would be really great. I could beat him again." And I'm literally looking around thinking, isn't anybody going to call her on that? She didn't beat him in the first place. How come they let that slide right by? And it's like, look, lady, it has nothing, there's a reason that our founding fathers put the Electoral College in place, and that it's not the popular vote. And if you're going to run for president, you should really understand how you get elected to that office. Because you didn't win. You didn't beat him in 2016. So it wouldn't be a rematch in the sense that you could beat him again, lady. So, even if she, and I'm sure that President Trump and his people would love her to jump back in. If she thinks that nobody, and she said this, if she thinks that, nobody could beat him out of the people who are currently the candidates, that she would maybe step in if she felt she could beat him. That would be one heck of a thing to watch, another rematch between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. But, yeah, can somebody come in now? We have the issue of possibly a brokered convention, which would, open the door for that, X factor, for that wild card to come onto the scenes. If they don't nominate a candidate in the first round, right, and it eventually goes to a brokered convention, yeah, that's when a Hillary can come in or a Michelle Obama can come in. I can't imagine Michelle Obama wanting to do this. I mean, first of all, this is a woman who has demonstrated time and time again she's not particularly fond of the United States of America. She doesn't particularly think that this is a country.
She's also not fond of politics.
Exactly.
She has made very strong statements in the past about the last thing in the world she would ever want to do is to be a politician.
And she wants to enjoy her $15 million beachfront or oceanfront estate they just bought right here in Massachusetts on Martha's Vineyard. Okay. Now, I thought the oceans were rising, right? And he was, but and it was it was going to be gone. Why do you buy a $15 million oceanfront property if it's not going to be there in 12 years? But hey.
Well, maybe he doesn't believe that.
Yeah, no, but he does. But you know what? That lie certainly has made Al Gore, worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
If you've ever seen a picture of his mansion up in Kentucky, there you could see it from the space shuttle.
Well, we're running to the end of our time, and I want to thank you, Joe, for coming on tonight, and for sharing your insights and your good humor. And this is Dr. Larry Fedewa. I can be accessed at on the YouTube under Dr. Larry Fedewa, or under Dr. Larry Welcomes, or even under Lawrence Fedewa for some of the older stuff. And my website is the drlarryonline.com, and we also invite you to come to take a look at the podcasts of these programs, which is available on the Batchelor News radionetwork.com. And we're now at the point where we have to say goodnight, and God bless America, and God bless everybody listening.